I start with a little quote. Learning English for me, it's like a journey, and the final destination is the ability to speak confidently and fluently. Now, this may sound like just a kind of superficial quote, but there's quite a lot of thinking behind this. Obviously, what unites all our different classes and students is that they all have this shared goal of ideally in the end being able to speak English confidently and fluently. However, our classes are different and our students are different, and there might be different levels. And also this idea of level as a kind of catch-all thing for saying that, I don't know, everyone in a class is intermediate level is further complicated by the fact that within each student or in each class, you might have learners who are different levels at different aspects of learning English. I think we can think of students as like little bar charts. So you might have some students who are very good at speaking fluently, but then they make a lot of grammatical mistakes. Or you might have students who read a lot and they're very good at reading, but they have trouble speaking confidently. So although all our students share this common destination, they're going to be reaching this destination in many different ways. Some will want the most direct, the fastest route. Others will want to take the scenic route. But either way, we're hoping they'll all end up in the same position. Now, the fundamental thinking behind Speak Out is this idea that we all reach this destination, in different routes. So within the course itself, we've built this kind of dual track approach. Now, it is much more than just a dual track, but we'll come back to this later. Now, the main track on this dual track approach is looking at developing speaking, and everything that kind of we need to do in order to develop that speaking. And then as a kind of side road, we've got, or detour if you like, we've got this idea of developing other skills in tandem with speaking. We'll come back to this later, and hopefully once we look at each skill in turn, you'll see how it all fits together. So if our main track in this dual track approach is developing speaking, let's look at speaking first. Now, I don't know if you attended Lindsay's webinar last week, where she looked at developing confidence in speaking. I'm going to start with speaking as partly kind of that's the main track of the course, but also as a kind of bridge from Lindsay's talk into this talk where we look at other skills. I'm going to be looking at speaking in terms of how we can actually improve it, make it better. Obviously, confidence is a part of that, but there are other aspects that we're going to look at as well. Now, ideally, what I'd like to do is demonstrate a speaking activity and then reflect on that and look at what elements you included when you did the speaking activity. However, unfortunately, we are confined to cyberspace, which makes doing a mingle, get up and walk around speaking activity a bit difficult. So what I'm going to do is try my best to explain the activity and talk you through each stage. So the activity is called Who Did It? And it's one of my favorite speaking activities, which have kind of, it's one of those activities you have in your back pocket that you like to pull out. And it's that activity for me, which we later developed into one of the lessons in the book. Good thing about this activity is it's productive, gets students speaking, it's flexible, and you can change different elements of it, and you can adapt it to a variety of situations and a variety of different purposes. The best thing about this activity, though, is that all it requires in preparation is making a series of strips of paper. So you can literally take a bit of scrap paper, cut it into strips, one for each student in the class, and give them out. And that's all you need to do to prepare. And I'm sure we can appreciate that as busy teachers. So what we do first of all is we give out a blank strip of paper to each student in the class, okay? And then we ask each student to write down a sentence which describes something they've done so far this week. Now, it doesn't have to be anything particularly interesting or unusual, and in fact, the more day-to-day and mundane the activity is, the kind of better the activity as a whole works. So, for example, if I was a student doing this activity and you asked me to write a sentence about something I've done this week, I would write probably this: I've had a few cups of coffee this week, including now. So again, it's something day-to-day, usual, probably most people have done it, and that's it, something that we've done this week. So students write their sentence like this, fold it over, don't show it to anyone else, don't write their name on it, and then you, the teacher, go around and collect them all. Give them a good shuffle, give them all out to students again, make sure they don't show it to anyone else, and then just do a quick check, has everyone got a sentence that they didn't write, because you don't want them getting their sentences back. Okay, so the purpose of this activity, it's a bit like a kind of standard find someone who activity. So the idea is what they have to do is find the person who wrote this sentence. So the first step they'll need to do is to work out how to say this sentence as a yes/no question. Any ideas what that would be? If you want to type it in the box.
Just give it a few more seconds. See if you do want to answer, Damian, you can put your answers in the questions box in the side panel.
Okay, not to worry. Basically,
have you had any coffee this week?
Yeah, brilliant. That's it. Yeah. So have you had any coffee this week, or just have you had a few cups of coffee this week? So it's literally just turning that sentence into a yes/no question. So they've got the question, they go around asking students until they find out who's written it. But there's a twist. When a student asks another student this question, have you had any cups or a few cups of coffee this week, or any coffee this week, they must answer exactly like this. Funnily enough, yes, I have. Whether it's true or not, they have to answer, funnily enough, yes, I have. And you can drill this response around the class. Yes, I have. Enough, yes, I have. Funnily enough, yes, I have. And so on and so on. And the idea being that if it's a lie for them, we want them to be convincing. So if they've got this fixed phrase that they've learned, they've been drilled, they can just respond and they're not going to falter if they're lying or anything. So we ask the question, have you had a few cups of coffee this week? Funnily enough, yes, I have. Students then have to ask more detailed questions to try and catch them out. So for this, it might be, how many cups of coffee have you had? What type of coffee have you had? Who did you have it with? Where did you have it? How much did it cost? And so on, until they try and catch them out. And then eventually, if they think they found the person, they can say, did you write this sentence? And so on. So that way, it's like a find someone who, but it's also a bit like a lie game as well. They have to tell the wrong answers and then try and bluff their way through. So that goes on until basically all the students have found all the other people who wrote their sentences. So I want you to imagine that you have just done this activity as a student, okay? And I'm going to ask you a few questions. Once again, just type your answers into the question box. It'll be that side, I think. Okay. So number one, what was the communicative goal of this activity?
I think people are still typing their answers. To keep the conversation going.
Okay.
Small talk.
Uh-huh.
Anyone else want to put an answer in there?
Okay, that's
Students
fine.
learn the present perfect tense.
Okay, present. Okay, so we've got keep the conversation going, make small talk, use the present perfect. Now, these are all kind of effects of this activity and things that we hope they're going to be doing. But when we try and figure out what's the communicative goal, what we're really asking is, how do students know when they've finished this activity? And the simple answer is they know they've finished when they found the person who wrote the sentence. So the communicative goal, what they're trying to do in terms of communication, is to find who wrote the sentence. And that's what we kind of mean by the communicative goal, if I could say it, is what do they have to do regardless of the language that they're using. Okay, and what language did you use in this activity? I think we already had an answer of that with present perfect, and then they're likely to be using past simple for the details of the questions. How was the activity personalised? You like to write your answers in the box.
I think people are still typing their answers in. Each one writes their thoughts.
Okay.
By asking more specific questions. Students are talking about the things they actually did.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the hits the nail on the head, really. It's rather than giving them a kind of find somewhere who where we prescribe what they find, it's completely student generated. So they're writing about things that they've done that week. They're talking about their own world. And also like that answer about asking personalized questions as well. I think that kind of extends it even more. And finally, we'll answer this together. How did you prepare? Oh, they wrote the sentences. You can also get students thinking about possible follow-up questions that they're going to ask as well. So the point is, when they go into it, they're prepared, they're ready. All they've got to do is speak rather than think about what they're going to say. Good. So basically, I've used this activity because it demonstrates what I think we need to include when we're truly developing speaking, when we're teaching students how to speak. First and foremost, we need to have a clear communicative goal. Now, a word that's going to come up quite a lot during this talk is transferability. The idea being that, okay, as language teachers, we're teaching language. However, I kind of think more what we're really doing is preparing students for how they're going to use English outside the class. So we're training them for these situations. Teaching language, specific language points, grammar, vocabulary, is part of that. But it's how we combine it all together for a particular speaking activity. And our starting point then has to be, what is the communicative goal? So rather than saying, okay, we need to, this lesson, we need to teach the past simple, we need to teach passives and so on. We need to think further than that about what a student's going to be doing with this language. So our starting point, our aim for a speaking lesson should be, we want to teach students how to have a conversation, how to carry out a survey, how to choose the 5 best movies they've seen this year or something like that. So it's in real terms. It's the communicative goal is something that you could be aiming to achieve regardless of whether you're a language student or not. So it's something you do in real life. And that needs to be our starting point. From there, we then plan backwards throughout the lesson what they need to do in order to achieve this goal. So once we've established the goal, we need to decide what tools do students need to achieve this task or this communicative goal. And it could be a type of grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, functional language, anything like that that they're gonna need for this goal. And it's very much how we built the main strand in Roadmap. We started with these communicative goals, which we drew from the Global Scale of English, the GSE, matched to level, which gave us an idea of kind of what students need to do at each level. And then from there, we would plan what we needed. And sometimes when writing it, it involved getting a friend or something to sit down and do this task together, record ourselves, and then pick out what language we needed from that. The next thing that's important in developing speaking is personalization. There are many benefits of personalization throughout material and in a language class. But one of the biggest ones here is well, personalization is a topic that every person is an expert on, more so than anyone else. So everyone knows their own experiences, their own background, their own life, so they'll have more to say about it than anyone else. Also, coming back to this idea of transferability, if we want students to achieve these goals outside class, then if we make them personalized in class, then it's going to make the bridging a much smoother process. Another important thing for developing speaking in class is giving students preparation time as well. I often like to think of it as a minute preparing to speak can lead to 10 more minutes speaking. It could just be, students have got discussion questions, rather than just saying, here's some questions, discuss. Give them a minute first to think about their answers, maybe even make notes that they can draw from. And this is going to make it much more productive. And it also avoids a situation where a student does a speaking activity, finishes it and says, oh yeah, I wish I'd said that. I just remembered something, and so on. As part of this preparation time as well, I've put it in brackets, it's not wholly necessary, I don't think, but it's certainly useful, is to provide a model. So if you want students to do a task, say, for example, work together to decide what movie to watch tonight, then they can first listen to people doing this successfully. And this helps kind of give them a picture in their mind of what success looks like, something to aim for with this goal. Now, finally, another aspect I think is important, which we did answer in our questions in the previous slide, is an opportunity for reflection. And this has kind of two aspects. Reflecting on what made the goal successful or not unsuccessful in practical terms, but also in terms of, if you like, proflection. What they're going to take from that and how they're going to use it in the future, or what they still need to work on, how they're going to work on that in the future. And this, again, it's this idea of transferability. It's making a bridge between what they've just done to how they're going to develop it into the future. So, as I said, this is how we kind of built the main units in Roadmap. So let me show you an example of how we do this. So, for example, in this lesson, students talk about past experiences. And the final speaking task is students play a game called the lie game. And this was kind of the iteration of that activity into course book format, if you like. And for the final game, they play this game. They make up some sentences, true and false, and then they try and bluff them, and students have to guess whether they're lying or telling the truth. So we started with our clear goal, if you can see here. At the top of each of the main speaking lessons starts with goal and then tools in terms of grammar or vocabulary. So our main goal here, our communicative goal, is we want students to be able to describe past experiences that they've had. And the tools we found most useful for this were the present perfect with ever and never, and verb phrases related to the topics of experiences. We also give them some useful phrases just before they do the speaking task as well. So extra kind of functional language, which allows them to kind of fill in the gaps for the task. So because here they're playing a game, things like, shall I start? It's my turn. Well done, that kind of thing. Now, all of the main lessons finish with this final speaking task, which is related to the communicative goal of the lesson. And they're always in two stages. We have a prepare stage and then a speak stage where they do the actual task. So in this prepare stage, you can see they listen to a model, two people playing this game, and find out how the game works. Then they listen again, a bit of comprehension with some questions that they hear, and then they guess whether Rob in the game is telling the truth or not. And the next stage of preparation is where they prepare their own ideas. So we give them some ideas for experiences they could write about, they could speak about, sorry, a meal you've cooked, a place you visited, and so on. With almost all of these tasks, we give a few ideas like this for students who have trouble thinking of ideas. But here we said, for example, so the idea is that if they've got a better idea of some other kind of experience they can use, they can do that as well. So while we kind of get their ideas going, they're also free to use their own, and this is where the personalization comes in. And they make notes on these by way of preparation. Then finally comes the speaking task. So here's the final activity: play the game with your partner, use the useful phrases. Then part B, they change partners, play it again, just a bit of extra practice. And then finally, we've got this reflection on the activity, part C. So who told an interesting story, who told an interesting lie, so on. And then they can share that with the class. You can have a bit of a class discussion on it. But also there's reflection in terms of the kind of nuts and bolts of the activity. So in the teacher's book for every lesson, right at the end of each lesson, we have this reflection on learning section. And these are questions designed, they're different for each lesson, and they're designed to get the students thinking about the kind of language they've used and how they're going to use it in the future. So here, for example, we have, was it easy or difficult to use the present perfect in the game? Why? And which three phrases from the lesson will you use most in the future, and why? And then they discuss, and then you can have a class discussion and that kind of thing. So that, again, we're kind of building the bridge between what they've done and how they're gonna, their next steps on their road to achieving their goal of speaking. So what about other skills? Okay, so when we're talking about language, we can generally divide it into two areas. So we have language systems, things like grammar, lexis, pronunciation, functional language discourse. And then on the other side, we have what we call language skills. And we generally, although there is a lot of overlap, especially nowadays with technology, our starting point is generally for what we call macro skills: listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Now, I've organized these in two ways. So the first way is aimed at reflecting how we acquire language in our first language. So first we listen to our parents, and then later in life we don't, and then later in life we do again, so on. But we start by listening to things our parents say to us, and then we respond. We start speaking to respond, get things we want, that kind of thing. And then we go to school, we learn to read and then write. But I've also divided these in two ways. So listening, speaking on the top, speaking and writing on the bottom. So listening and reading we generally think of as receptive skills because they involve input information coming in. And speaking and writing we think of as productive skills because we're producing new language to the outside. Okay, so we're going to look at receptive skills, listening and speaking. And I'd like to show you a quote about traditional listening or speaking lessons. So in a traditional listening or speaking lesson, it would revolve around supplying students, working with a text or a script, and helping and guiding students towards understanding that script or text. So I've got a quote from John Field, who's done a lot of work in what he calls decoding, breaking down listening skills into different sub-skills. This is what he's got to say about conventional lessons. So a conventional listening comprehension lesson simply adds yet another text to the learner's experience. It does little or nothing to improve the effectiveness of their listening or to address their shortcomings as listeners. So what he's saying basically here is traditional receptive skills, in this case listening lessons, just give practice in listening. It's another text that they can listen and understand to. What it doesn't do is teach them how to listen, how to develop or improve that listening skill. So a traditional receptive skills lesson might look like this. We start with a lead-in where we contextualize the script or the text, maybe using pictures, there might be some discussion, something like that. We might pre-teach some vocabulary if it's essential for understanding. We think students won't know it. Then we usually start with a gist task. So they listen or read for gist. If they're reading, they might be skimming the text for a general understanding. Then they go back to the text or the script again and do a more detailed comprehension task. And this might be comprehension questions. It might be true, false. It might be who said these things, something like that. The idea is now they're practicing reading or listening for detail or specific information or inference, something like that. And then finally, once we're happy they've understood the text or the script, we have a short follow-up task. So it could be a discussion on the topic where they have the chance to respond personally to the text or the script, or it could be a piece of writing, something productive generally. So looking at the structure of a conventional receptive skills lesson, whereabouts in this lesson do we actually teach how to read or how to listen? Well, the answer is we don't. What we're doing here is practicing, not teaching. It's useful to make a distinction here, I think, between process and product. Now, you might have come across these ideas when we talk about teaching writing. Traditionally, product-based writing lessons would focus on the end product. So you'd give students an example of, say, a letter of complaint. You say, write one like this. You might pick it apart a bit, say, write it like this. Whereas process writing has part of that, but it also teaches the specific processes that students go through or need to go through when they write. Things like planning and selecting and rejecting ideas, reviewing, drafting, checking, that kind of thing. So what we need to do with receptive skills is apply this as well. So rather than just looking at the product, i.e. the students have understood the text, we need to also teach the process. How can students understand the text? And more importantly, what can we teach them that they can then take outside the classroom and transfer this to other real life types of listening and reading? So let's look at an example from Roadmap, obviously. Now this is from A2 level again, and it's a text that learners read in Develop Your Reading Lesson 4C. Basically, there are 3 reviews of a boot camp, like a fitness club, and students are going to read this. By the way, these Develop Your lessons are linked thematically to the main track lessons, and the main track lesson in 4C is the topic is all about mud runs, mud races, things like Tough Mudder, obstacle courses. So this is kind of following an extension of that topic. So we want to teach students how to become better review readers, as it were. So we need to start, as we're speaking, with our communicative goal or learning objective. So with these, we've come up with this. Students will be better able to understand a review. And if you look here at the top of each develop your skills lesson, we have the goal at the top here, understand and review. However, if reading is the macro skill here, what we need to do is pick out a sub-skill. Now, sub-skills are things that we do in our first language unconsciously. We do it subconsciously, we don't really think about it, but we do it. So when we're skimming a text, we're not reading every word carefully. A sub-skill is that we're kind of glossing over the words. Likewise, here, in order to understand a review, because reviews often talk about people and things, we've identified a sub-skill as understanding pronouns and who they refer to in a text. This is the focus here in this lesson, and this gives us a transferable strategy. This is something that once we teach how to do it, students can then take outside the classroom and apply it to their other types of reading. So in the lesson, it appears like this. We start with a lead-in and a gist task, like our traditional format. Then we come to this box. Now this box very much resembles like a grammar focus box in a grammar-based lesson or a main speaking lesson, except here it's teaching a sub-skill rather than a grammar point. So here it's understanding pronouns, and we give an explanation here. We use pronouns, for example, in a text when we don't want to repeat a word, phrase or sentence. This makes the text sound better. But last year I went to a boot camp. The staff there were strict but kind. They gave me a lot of help instead of the staff gave me a lot of help. It was actually a lot of fun instead of the boot camp was actually a lot of fun. And then we say why this is important. So it's important to understand which word or phrase a pronoun refers to so that we can read text more quickly. If students are better at knowing what they refer to, then they're not going to be thinking, oh, what's it referring to? They're going to read more fluently. So we teach this transferable strategy or this sub-skill. Then what we do is we give students some controlled practice of this, some kind of guided practice. So there are 3 reviews, A, B and C. In exercise 4A here, they look at the words in bold and review A, and they choose the correct options, what it refers to. And then another activity here where we're kind of moving more towards the productive. B, find pronouns that refer to these things in reviews B and C. So after that, students go back to the text and we come back to our kind of further comprehension. So students read the reviews, answer the questions, and these are all kind of designed to pick out the use of pronouns. Basically, it's a chance for students to put into practice the strategy that they've learned, much like a kind of freer practice activity in a grammar lesson. So this has basically led us to the approach that we take when developing receptive skills in Roadmap. As with the traditional format, we start with a lead-in and a gist task. However, then we insert this bit of teaching. So we have the focus on the sub-skill, where we teach a strategy. Then we have some controlled kind of guided practice. And then we come back to the text or a similar text. Sometimes it's one long or sometimes it's 2 texts, depends on the lesson. And we have a more detailed task. But here, instead of just practicing this type of sub-skill, they're putting into practice what they've been taught, the transferable strategies that they've been taught. And then, as with traditional format, we end with a follow-up task where students can discuss or respond personally to the text or the script. So this is at the heart of the extended track in Roadmap, this idea of truly developing or teaching, not just practicing skills. To show you a quick example of how this works with listening as well, this is a lesson from Develop Your Listening lesson 2C. The main track lesson is about different recipes from around the world, kind of unusual recipes. And as you could probably guess from the photos, This one's about food as well. It's actually a talk about, a podcast about new ways of eating food. So there's things like laboratory grown meat, eating insects, that kind of thing. So starting as ever with our communicative goal, we want students to understand a short talk. Now, in order to do that, a short talk podcast is going to involve quite rapid speech. So we want them to recognise weak forms. Weak forms, we mean these things like grammatical words that when you're speaking quickly get kind of swallowed and scrunched up. Things like can for can or for and, that kind of thing. So after they've done their lead-in, initial listening, and then we have this focus box here. Important words in a sentence are usually stressed. The words that have less meaning, articles, auxiliary verbs, prepositions, and so on, aren't stressed and are usually pronounced in their weak form. And then we've got an example, which is drawn from the listening. And then we say why it's important. Recognising weak forms is important so you can understand natural speech. Then we move on to our controlled practice. Students underline what they think are the weak forms, then listen and check. And then again, moving to slightly more productive, students listen and complete these extracts with weak forms. And then finally, they listen to the next part of the discussion and answer the comprehension questions. And again, it's giving them a chance to put this strategy into practice. And then finally, we've got our follow-up task where they work in groups. Do you agree? Do you think? And so on. So they respond personally to the text. So that's speaking, that's receptive skills. Now, kind of bridging the gap in a way comes writing. So in Roadmap, we follow kind of the same approach in developing writing as developing speaking, but also there are also elements that we share with the receptive skills by providing a transferable strategy that they can then use outside the classroom. But obviously, because it's also a productive skill, there are elements similar to speaking. Let me show you what I mean. So this is from a lesson in lesson 1B, develop your writing lesson 1B at the A2+ level. So it's right at the start of the course. And our communicative goal is that we want students to complete the questionnaire. And the focus, the strategy that we're teaching to help them complete this questionnaire is giving them some language to help them explain reasons and results. Now, the questionnaire is a questionnaire about learning English and learning preferences, how you like to learn English. Now, this is quite similar to the speaking in terms of the fact that we give them a model. So here they start by reading the model. This is someone who's completed the questionnaire, and then they've got the questions which they match to the answers. So they're getting familiar with the task that they're eventually going to write, and also kind of what an idea of success looks like. Then what we do is we teach the strategy. So here it's broken down into structures for explaining reasons and results. So we've got because of, because, and so that to give reasons, and that's why to explain results. So again, after that, same format, we've got the controlled practice. They match the sentence halves, fairly receptive, and then they choose the correct alternatives, becoming more productive. Then we come to our final writing task, which, like the speaking, is divided into two sections. We've got the prepare section and the write. So we refer them back to the questions that they had before, and they make notes about each one, and then some extra kind of useful phrases to fill in the gaps, and they write their answers to the questions. Now, this has kind of got, this particular lesson has got an added element of transferability in that we thought it'd be a nice idea at the start of the book, especially if you're using it with a new class, to get students to write about their learning preferences so that the teacher can then use it as a kind of diagnostic. And then you can use the flexibility of the dual track approach later in the book to tailor the material for what the students want and their needs. Now, another point that's worth making about writing is when it comes to choosing things to write about, and as with all of these areas and all of the lessons, we start by thinking, okay, what are students going to need? What are all the things they might need to use English in this way in real life? So we start by looking at traditional types of writing that we teach in the classroom that you might see. Things like essays, letters, stories, reports, articles, applications, biographies, and so on, things like this. But then we kind of thought, well, people generally, I mean, people do write these things, but a lot of writing these days is much shorter and it's much more computer-based. And this includes things like blogs, different types of email, whether it be like formal emails or those, like you get those long chains of email where lots of people communicate, and sometimes the answer is just great thanks or something like that. TripAdvisor style reviews or Amazon style reviews, any kind of reviews that people post online. eBay style adverts for kind of if you want to sell things that you don't use anymore. Short messages, things like Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, that kind of thing. Online profiles, if you're joining a course or on a social media site, you might write a short profile of yourself. Social media posts, that kind of thing. So we've tried to include these, but we also kind of recognise that, okay, it's great to have all these modern writing things, this is transferable, but we also recognise that a lot of students do need to learn how to write more traditional things for international exams, end of school exams, that kind of thing that they're often tested on. So what we've tried to do in Roadmap is have a mix of both throughout the levels. And this gives the teachers, again, opportunity to provide learners with development of the writing skills they'll need outside the classroom and inside the classroom in a variety of contexts. So you kind of pick and choose what your students need. So finally then, coming back, this is what the kind of the dual track looks like. So in the what we call the fast track route, the main route, this is what you'd expect from a general English adult course book. So there are 10 units in each level, and each unit is broken up into 4 lessons. We've got 3 main lessons, A, B, C. B is English in Action, which is a functional language lesson. And then each unit ends with a check and reflect where students can review what they've done. So linked to the first 3 main lessons, A, B, C, we've got the Develop Your Skills, and these are linked by topic. So basically, whatever your situation, you can take something from Roadmap to use. Say you're doing a short summer course, you might just want to follow the fast track route. Plenty of speaking practice, plenty of speaking development as well. Or as a comprehensive course, you might want to do everything, extended route. Or depending on your students' needs. Again, this idea of students as little bar chart profiles who might need work on listening more than something else. You can pick and choose. You can go along the main route and then do extra practice where it's necessary or where students ask for it. So that's it.